Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Future World Conversations. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, this series is part of Future World Alliance commitment to help educators, product leaders, and AI curious professionals navigate the future with clarity, intention, and responsibility. Today's topic is one that feels especially relevant right now. AI is accelerating everywhere, content, feedback, iteration, output. But speed does not automatically equal learning. And automation does not automatically equal engagement. So the real question we are exploring here today is what does real learning and real engagement actually looks like in the age of AI? We are joined by Rob Alvarez, known globally as Professor Game, a gamification strategist, TEDx speaker, and the host of one of the leading podcasts in gamification and behavioral design. Through his work with global organizations and educators, Rob has spent years studying what truly drives motivation and sustained participation. Today's session is intentionally structured as an open discussion. So feel free to unmute yourself, add your perspectives to the discussion. We will have the floor open and it will be interactive. And if you're not able to unmute yourself, drop in your reflections in the chat or add your questions. We will be engaging with all your insights and the dialogues. Okay. Rob, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this session with us. We are excited to learn from your perspective. Without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure, to talk about interesting things with interesting people. So I'm delighted to be here. To give you a little bit of context, as Padma very kindly introduced me, I do work as a consultant at the Octalysis Group. I also teach at multiple universities. So I also have the education, especially higher education side, very present in my regular life. And lately I've also been opening up for some workshops to help fellow colleagues in higher education, especially in business education, start thinking about how AI, why AI, and where not AI as well is relevant, how it can be used, and sort of co-create many of the experiences. I think in general, one of the things I was expecting this to happen during the workshop, but it's funny how it eventually happened with, in the same session, we have 5 sessions, and in the same session, the 2 things that changed without me knowing beforehand happened in the same session, right? AI is moving really fast. Most of the times, what it tends to mean in these kinds of sessions is that we figure out there's a new thing that we can now use that is so much better than before. In my case, this experience in particular was the opposite, right? They had to do more with the business models of these of some of the AI systems that that I've been using in my professional work as a professor. But it changed, and this is constantly changing. The business models and everything is still very fluid because it's not very well settled yet how these things are going to work. And I think that is something to always keep in mind when working with AI. It's not, as with many other technologies or even core concepts in general, it's not like, oh, now I know what this is about, and I know exactly what are you have sort of very clear established limits of how it goes, and I'm done, right? This is constant learning, constant exploration. In fact, many people argue, and I tend to agree overall, that keeping up with everything that's going on in AI is not only not possible, but even if it were, it's impractical. You would have to invest all your time just keeping up with absolutely everything. It's more about having an open mind and seeing what kinds of things you can do. So just to set that up, and then how we think about these in terms of the Octalysis lens. Octalysis framework is, as you might know, a behavioral design, science-backed framework that we use to help corporates, companies, small startups, and educational institutions as well generate massive engagement, using these science-backed strategies, and we've been doing it for over a decade now. The backing behind this framework has been long going for a pretty long time. The original creator was also the founder of the Octalysis Group, is Yukai Chao. And he's been thinking about gamification in many different ways since, I don't know, like over 20 years at this point. So just to give you that context, also, of course, with everything that's been happening with AI, we've both been using it for our own designs and the way that we create things and in our own consultancy, but also thinking of it in more, I don't want to say academic terms because we're a consulting group. We are constantly applying, but in sort of the thinking of what are the implications? How does this look like in the future? What is something that we wanna work on, and how gamification, which is our core specialty here in behavioral design, can give us some lessons to apply and to better use AI. And there's many interesting things, but many venues we could get on through that. But I don't know if there's any questions. I could talk for the whole hour. So I want to also cater for the interest of participants, of your anybody who's around, any questions you might have in that sense.
That's interesting. Jim, just to give you more perspective, we are doing an open discussion format here today. So if you have any questions, anyone have any questions, just unmute yourself and then be part of the discussion.
Hey, Rob, I have one topic I'd be interested in hearing about. You mentioned how it's impossible to keep up with all that's happening in AI. How do you feel game mechanics and the autolysis framework and just gamification in general can help, whether it's organizations or even individuals, prioritize how and what they learn? Have you thought about the intersection of those worlds at all?
Prioritize. Well, in the 5-step process that we do in the Octalysis group, and that is part of the Octalysis framework. One of the first few things that we do is an exercise precisely in prioritization. Right. I don't think it applies directly into sort of individuals and what to learn and whatnot, but the whole thinking behind it, where yes, you can have many objectives, many things going on, but also very clearly establishing, what is it that I need the most? And if there were to be a second thing, what would be that second thing? If there were a third thing, what is that third thing that I would like to learn? Here, unless you're thinking of it in terms of how do I motivate myself to do the prioritization, definitely, game mechanics and behavioral design and behavioral science in general could help you in that motivation. But I think that in general, prioritization is very, very important step. Sometimes it feels like it's very boring. We see this with clients all the time where they feel like, oh, we're looking for the game mechanics and how the game's going to look and the visuals and all these interactions. And this is a very important stage without understanding truly what you're aiming for, what you're optimizing for. And I think in AI, it happens exactly the same way. What are you optimizing for? Like, just to give a few examples, like nowadays, very recently, we have these I think the name in one of these companies is a co-working AI. And actually do sort of agentic work for you. It's very interesting. Personally, I found some uses I can give to that where it's very manual work. I know I have to do. I haven't done just because I haven't had the time. So it could be an interesting avenue to explore versus having other things like, well, how do I integrate this into, for example, in the classroom, which is something that I've been talking about. I'm literally running the workshop. I had a session yesterday. I'm having a session tomorrow again. How do we integrate this into specific activities and what kind of activities you want to integrate? And then there's another exercise in prioritization. Even if you say, let me learn all I can about, integrating this into specific activities, then you say, well, okay, which one do I start with? Which could be a potentially good session or specific interaction that I've been running away from doing because it requires too much of my touch and I don't manage to have maybe too many students, or it requires a lot of interaction from my side. But students would benefit from having that overall running over and over interaction with something that is not perfect. Of course, it's never going to be one of us, even if we try to, I know Ross has like a second brain in that sense. I'm sure it's still not going to be as smart as you are and not really have all of your experience. Even if we aim for that, there's always going to be a bit of a lackluster in many ways. But there is, with that quote unquote lackluster experience, you can do like a lot of things and there's a lot of benefit even there. So again, prioritizing. Am I going to dive into co-working and how this can do tasks for me and automate some tasks? Or am I going to prioritize how to do, for example, the customized LLM models so that my students can do a specific task over and over again to learn better in a very engaging way? What am I going to prioritize? What comes first? Maybe you'll do both, but you're not going to do both today. You're probably not going to do both at the same week even. You prioritize, you invest your time, you invest your energy, your learning, your motivation in one of them. Finish it because that's the most important thing or the most pressing for whatever reason, and then you have a chance to move on to the next one once you've mastered that quote unquote or taken it to the level where it no longer is a priority to learn more, I would say. So I love the question, by the way.
Excellent. Thanks.
I just want to change my question from a little bit different perspective. So from the behavioral design lens, so if we were to design an AI-enabled course or a product from scratch, what principles should guide the engagement system before we even choose the tools? Because I know you are a professor, you teach courses, you do design all these games, gamification and all that. So from your perspective, I want to understand how does this actually, what things we should keep it in mind before designing engagement systems and even before designing, choosing the tools.
So in general, looking at it from the lens of the Octalysis framework, there's actually a blog post. I think it was Joris who posted it. I found it very, very interesting, our CEO, where he's discussing, the convergence of AI and gamification and why human-focused design starts with AI. It starts to matter even more than it mattered before. There is in the Octalysis framework, we amongst other things, when we talk about the core drives and the main 8 core motivators for human behavior, there are at least 2 different classifications that we have, and one of them has to do with what we call white hat strategies and black hat strategies. They're not good or bad. Black or white is not good or bad. They just have a very different focus. This is something that we realized even before AI. In general, when you have a very heavy focus on looking at the data, in general, you always watch recent data. Right? You do A/B testing. The A/B testing is, in the past 2 weeks, in the past month, which of these 2 strategies got me more, whatever it is that you're getting, ROI, engagement, more people returning to the platform where they're learning. What is it that you're aiming for? And the problem with data is that it is hiding some underlying truths in there. When you only use data, the result with 99% accuracy is that you're going to have only black hat mechanics. Black hat mechanics are directing you towards creating a sense of urgency. Oh, take action right now. The problem with that is that although you get very immediate results, if you don't bring in the right mix of white hat mechanics as well, then the user is eventually just going to burn out and say, yes, I am urged into taking action. I take action, but then I feel out of control. I don't feel well about this interaction necessarily. Again, if it's not well balanced, it's not essentially bad, but when you overuse it, when you over abuse it, it tends to be going in that direction. And data is always going to point you to what gets you results in the immediate run. Usually when you're looking at data, you don't look at, oh, has this generated, over the past 10 years, because you're not testing for the past year or 2 years. And that's where the human in the loop says, oh yeah, that's right. That gets you better results in the short run. But an expert in Octalysis design will tell you, yes, but you also need to balance it out. If this is an experience for the medium or the long run as well, where you need to balance it out with other white hat mechanics, which also make the user feel good. It's not going to move you into immediate action, but you will feel more in control. You start exercising your creativity by getting feedback from your actions. You feel this epic meaning and calling, of improving the world, your community, your family, something that is just essentially greater than yourself. When you start introducing that and you mix it well with the black hat mechanics, you get immediate action, but then you also get the user to feel good about that immediate action. I think that would be one of the biggest things to watch out with AI, because AI is essentially built on data, right? Past data. So AI is great at crunching data and looking at all of that. If you only use what you get and use sort of the average stuff that is out there, which tends to be part of what AI can do, you're going to be diving into the black hat side of the motivations of human beings. And you might succeed in the short run, but if you don't balance it out well, in the long run, it'll not be effective. And let alone education, right? Education is not an endeavor. It's not a campaign, usually. 99% of the times you are thinking of something for today, tomorrow, the week after, the month after, the year after. In higher education, the least you have is like a year in a master's degree. If you go to undergrads, you have 4 to 5 years. And if you go further, you spend, I'm just listening to my daughter arrive home. She's 3 years old. And the school she just started could be the school she studies in for the next 15 years. She graduates when she is 18, in theory. So, that kind of length of experience, when you're thinking about it in terms of education, you want to think also in those very extended periods. And how do you create a product with AI, an AI product or whatever in between, so that you can also cater for a more balanced way of looking at things? And that's where the human in the loop, the expert who really knows how to cater for these different motivations, how to balance them out, is really key to bring that home.
I have a follow-up question on whatever you just mentioned regarding the A/B testing. So if A/B testing tends to optimize towards black hat urgency, what's a better way to test for white hat outcomes? What would you measure instead?
Here, the key thing that we found is, and this coming, I also have my sort of product manager history as well, where A/B testing is key to many things. And you're testing out a new feature, and you say, well, which feature, or do I put it here? Do I put it here? There is a space for A/B testing when you're testing out the feature. Again, if you're thinking features, that's what we tend to call in gamification in Octalysis framework function focused design. You're thinking about, is this able to perform the function or not? And again, AI is able to perform most of the functions that we give it, right? It's about how do I motivate people into performing that function, where this, and that's what we call human focused design, it is not excelling on something that is automated and doesn't have those key insights and the experience of looking through it from the lens of Octalysis. When you look at the balance between those, there's a part of it that is just sheer expertise and looking at it in action, of having analyzed tens, dozens, hundreds, or even I'm sure that Yukai could probably talk in terms of thousands of things that he's looked into. I mean, TOG has 175 plus clients in the past, but in terms of analysis and everything that has been built, I know Yukai has been doing this for longer and in other contexts. So that sheer experience of seeing how it pans out with this framework in mind gives you a better sense of what to cater for. A/B testing, again, I'm not saying A/B testing is evil in any way. A/B testing tends to fail when you think of it only in terms of the short term. When you're testing one thing versus another, you're saying, well, should I, for example, use a lot of scarcity? Scarcity is a black hat mechanic, and it guides you into immediate action, because if you feel something is scarce, it tells you to take action now. That's what your brain is telling you. How do I test that out versus epic meaning and calling? Do I combine? Do I say, well, this feature is about letting people know about the the massive impact that their action is taking, and I compare it with a sense of urgency that I get from scarcity? How do I compare them? It's really hard to compare them and to make them face off against one another, because you're not necessarily optimizing for a feature. You want to look more at the integral experience, and that's where, and in fact, I made a few weeks ago, I made a specific podcast episode where of sort of figuring out where the product management view of products and the Octalysis framework both coincide and completely collide and clash. The issue when you think of it in terms of engagement is that product management is very incremental, and you start adding features and measuring each of them independently. And a big problem there is that you don't see how they interact together as a whole. So the Frankenstein issue, you could call it. Right? The problem is you're not seeing the bigger picture. Yes, maybe you can add that scarcity, and that's going to get you more people to sign up immediately. But then how do you measure if those people, the lifetime value in terms of business, right? How do you measure the lifetime value of a user in an A/B testing that lasts for a week or even for a month? The lifetime value is not going to be measured there in the product that needs engagement, people to come back, right? So A/B testing would not be ideal. What we do recommend is looking at it in terms of Octalysis strength, right? Are you really balancing out? What kind of product are you doing? Because an example where a counter example of what I said before, where you only optimize for Black Hat is Booking.com. Booking.com, if you see the experience, I think it was when I wasn't at the Octalysis group, but I've looked into the case study many times and seen especially what Booking.com looked before the intervention of Octalysis, and you see it later. And nowadays you see there's a lot of scarcity, right? It's there's only 3 rooms left, and the whole way it is designed tends to be very Black Hat. And you say, well, but Rob, you just told me that if you only use Black Hat, people tend to burn out and don't come back. This is an exceptional situation. The way and the model and the business that Booking.com is in is different than most other business, very, very broadly generalizing. When you go and book a hotel, gave you that urgency, drove you into action, gave you some social validation as well, but social and ownership can be both Black Hat and White Hat. Here it's used very much in the Black Hat way. They validate you that other people have done it, and they urge you into taking action as well. So it's essentially a Black Hat experience mostly. And even if you feel out of control after it, you reflect and say, I didn't feel great about it. By the time you go again and book a hotel, there's 2 things that are happening there. One is that you pretty much forgot the sort of the downside of that experience. You do remember the good side of it, because you probably stayed at a good hotel, like Booking.com. And these, in general, these platforms tend to be very good at showing you what kind of hotel or place you're staying at. So you ended up having a good experience there. You remember that's more recent, plays out the recency effect. You tend to forget about that. And then when you're looking online, they also have positioned so well and use this mechanic so well that it helps them position so well in what used to be the main thing, which was SEO. And now we're looking at AI, SEO, or whatever you want to call it. But it positioned them so well that the next time you're looking for a hotel, you're going to run into Booking.com again. And now the recency effect is like the bad experience, it was not so bad. And the hotel was really good. So the result I got was the result that I wanted. That you're probably going to do it again. So it's an exceptional situation in that sense. There might be other exceptions where you submit yourself willingly to get a certain result to Black Hat. That's a place where you can merely just focus on that and get immediate results. If again you were ethically saying the mechanic is built ethically because you are getting something out of that. It's not just the product getting more engagement, the product getting more out of you. It's not extractive in that sense. So that is an example of what.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your perspective. Thank you, Carol. Over to you.
Hi, yes. So what really drew me to this particular discussion was the idea of impact as I think about how you're framing lasting engagement. And I'm curious because I think if you could just give me a high level view of is gamification as you're speaking of it only on a platform? Or I mostly work with undergraduate students on data science experiences. So we're giving them safe places to really engage with data science and AI tools. And so we're doing that in various ways. But as I look at my key performance indicators, I'm starting to think about best ways of measuring engagement and lasting engagement, how to bring people back, and what kind of strategies I can start employing to have repeat interest. So if you can kind of help me get a sense of more big picture, I think mostly everyone knows what you do, probably not me as well. And then if you could maybe provide some use case examples of ways that you've seen this work in the past, if you can, that would be super helpful for me.
So several things to unpack there. The first one is when you were saying that you're talking about undergrads, it's a technical subject. I studied software engineering, right? So we were essentially the geekies, the techies in the university. And there was this thing that I've mentioned this already 3 times, and I always forget then to refer and see if I can find it again. But it was essentially yeah, you can call it a game, but it was a very real life game that is similar, comparable to what you call King of the Mountain, right? The person who stands on top is the king of the mountain, and everybody's trying to bring down the king of the mountain to crown themselves king of the mountain. And this is back in 2005, maybe, well before AI. The concept of it was that you became king of the mountain by taking control over a server, an online server, right? So you took control over it, and now that you're the king of the mountain, what do you have to do, right? Just like the king of the mountain in the physical space, you have to try to keep control over it. So you're trying to set up your defenses in cybersecurity terms so that others cannot penetrate your defenses. Of course, eventually this breaks down and somebody else comes in. It was very successful in terms of building sort of an infinite loop. It doesn't matter how many times you played it and how many times you've won. The next time you do it is going to be different by definition. And cybersecurity changes and the strategies change, and it's sort of a self-updating course on cybersecurity in many ways. So I loved how that was structured. It had a lot of I could talk about each of the core drives there, but I don't want to spend all the time in that. But it was a brilliant example of something that was relatively easy to set up once you get some critical mass, and it was self-sustaining. You essentially had to do very little to keep it going, keep the experiment going, and people just playing over and over again. And since it was worldwide, while some people were sleeping, other people were engaging and trying to conquer the mountain, and they were learning by themselves in a very practical way. And I say this because I think there is a beautiful space in what you were mentioning there of this being something that is very, very practical. When you talk about using these strategies, how do you engage people in doing something that actually looks like what they're going to be working on potentially. And this is an overall principle that I've seen in education be very important and easily, very quickly, and very broadly forgotten. It's not just about what the content is about and teaching it correctly and that it's appropriate and all that, which is important, but it's a step towards how it is also meaningful, right? We want to think about the meaning of what we do, not just, oh, it is important because it's said in the syllabus or because that's what my degree says. It is, how is this applicable to them in their future lives? And the closer you can bring it, so to speak, to their hearts, the more they can be engaged. In terms of KPIs, I always, when I get this question pretty often, and what I always encourage people to do is actually take a step back. It's not about measuring immediately what does engagement look like. You don't want engagement for the sake of engagement. You want engagement for a reason. That is what you want to measure. You want to measure, are they learning better this concept? Are they applying it more times? Because maybe it's about something that requires sheer practice. Remember when you learn how to add, multiply, subtract? Most of it, honestly, is just doing it over and over and over again. So your metric is how many times a day, how many times a week, or in 30 days, how far they can reach, or whatever. It has to do with repetition in a case like that one. It can do with where you now with AI. One of the beautiful things with AI is that there's a lot of potential for personalization, and if it's possible, if it's meaningful, if it's very human in that sense, that it's authentic personalization, you can really cater for that and see what's the path of growth. So you apply Core Drive to accomplishment, development, and accomplishment, and showing people how much they can grow from where they were to where they can get to. And that's something that you can sometimes measure as well, if you're able to cater through using these tools in AI and understanding where they are in their path. I'm not sure if I answered your question because I went through sort of two paths in there. Please follow up if I forgot to dive into anything that you were broadly asking, because I know you mentioned about the KPIs and how to measure it, and looking into long-term engagement. And of course, if you talk about long-term engagement or even engagement in general, I will always suggest people looking into the Utalysis framework. We have, by the way, case studies in education as well. One of them is with Microsoft, which is the way that we got to be in contact today. There's other case studies that we have even on our webpage that you can look into as well. Does that answer, Carell?
Yeah, I think that really touched on some of the challenges maybe that I'm facing. But it sounds more of a longitudinal, like long-term study, which, we don't really have access to students, but for some short glimpses of their time here. So I think that's an interesting approach. And I'm curious about what behavioral design says about people who engage. Yes, I'm coming, and then never show up.
That's important. Yeah.
Just one thing
I'm wondering if there's something I'm missing there.
No, absolutely. The thing is, if you look at it from the intention of our 5-step process, you have to look both at, as I started from the get-go, like what is the objective? What do you really want to achieve? And it doesn't have, like I mentioned some things that might seem like very, very big, but it can be like that objective can be something a lot smaller. Like I also talked to finance professors that are or accounting professors that are looking at people practicing T accounts enough time so they can do it. I taught stats as well at some point in my life. And there's things that can be also very immediate. Like you want to get people to practice doing, I don't know, these predictions 20 times and with 20 exercises. AI can help you generate more exercises. Like that's one thing that I've done with a separate class. People are always, oh, do you have a mock exam, mock exam, mock exam? Forget about mock exam, get into exercises, do many. And me generating 100 exercises so they can also have different exercises between them and benefit from each other. Well, AI can actually do that for you if you set it up well. Just give them good examples. What are the sources? What are the concepts to explore? AI, you can go ahead and generate it, and they can have new examples all the time, whether they're exactly for the exam or not. Honestly, I'm always less worried about what grades they're going to get. They're the ones who are worried about that, and more how can I get them to be in the place I want them to be in terms of learning. So that's what I would encourage you to look into. Again, it could be lofty, 5-year goals if you're thinking of your undergrads in a more integral, systemic way. But it could also be your course, like you're teaching this thing for 1 session, 3 sessions, 10 sessions, 6 months, whatever that looks like. What are the things and how can I specify it there to understand that? And other things that you want to start looking into are what are exactly the actions you want them to take that make their learning meaningful. And then you start analyzing them as not as individuals necessarily, but how do they behave overall? You start looking at things like the player types. What are they motivated by? Are they people that tend to be more motivated? Like you start describing them and you can analyze them through the lens of the 8 core drives. Are they people who tend to have a lot of epic meaning and calling? These are people who, I don't know, are looking more at, saving the world kind of situations. It's the perfect example. If they're environmental students, they tend to have a little bit more of that, I would assume, than others. Or are they more people who are looking like people who are in sales in general tend to look more at the scarcity, tend to look a lot more at ownership and making more money, loss avoidance and that kind of stuff. Like what are they essentially motivated by, and how can you cater for those motivations with the designs that you create for them?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Very interesting. And of course, feel free to follow up in any way.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on it. So when you talk about engagement and the KPIs, so what metrics would convince you that a system is creating a long-term capability, not just a short-term impact and activity for it?
In terms of metrics, it depends on what you're. It all starts on what are you optimizing for, and I actually let me give you an example for that outside of education for a second. So if you go to the landing page of former Twitter, now X, right? Let me actually do that to make sure I'm not mixing up which is which. If you go to the landing page of that, you will see that the biggest buttons, essentially what they're optimizing for is creating new accounts. You go to x.com, you'll see it. There's a big black and white button that stands out above every other button there, and the other two are also sign up with 2 different platforms. They are optimizing for creating accounts. This is a social media, right? Then you go to Instagram.com, exactly without having logged in, open a new tab or something. And what is it optimizing for? Here, the first thing that you see in the big blue and white button that you're seeing right there is about logging in. One is optimizing for new users and the other one is optimizing for return users. It doesn't mean that both platforms are not doing a great job at the other things as well. But it does mean that when you are focusing on a design, a specific decision that you make, you're always, or 99% of the time, optimizing for one of them. One of them is going to have priority over the rest. So when you make that choice of what am I optimizing for, and you can have a list of 10, but eventually when you decide, you say, do I go for clicking a big sign-in button, or do I go for a big create account button? You have to make a choice. And your choice is, do I go for new users or do I go for return users? Neither is wrong. It depends on what you're optimizing for. Same thing, exact thing happens in education. Am I optimizing for them doing a lot of practice? Am I optimizing for them to understand concepts? Am I optimizing for memorization? I tend to be very against memorization, but I know in general that there are many applications of memorization as well for many things. What am I optimizing for? And depending on what it is, the result of what you create is going to be different as well. So
I'd like to add to that.
I'm sorry to be disappointing in terms of not giving a definitive answer.
I like it. I think what we're doing currently is optimizing for numbers, because that is the easiest thing to measure. And I'm curious, what would be a better example of a way to maximize for impact? Like, we do follow-ups, we get quotes, we measure how many instances reoccurring people have attended events or programs or different things, but I feel like I'm missing something. So yeah, I'm trying to think that
it tends to be a very tough question, what to measure when you're talking about education. And again, it is very specific and specialized in what are you optimizing for. The same career at a different university is probably going to be optimizing for something different. But going beyond that, there's also something that especially when I talk about gamification in education, I also have a workshop on that with fellow colleagues. One of the things that I tell them is that oftentimes you're saying, well, I'm optimizing for this. But then you also have the challenge of, how do I measure this? and how do I measure learning? Well, until we, either AI is able to solve this problem, or it becomes legal to sort of stick a cable and to wire our brains to read how we progress from A to B, measuring learning is something that is objectively not possible most of the time. So what do we do? And this is something we're already doing. We measure for something that seems to approximate learning. And it ends up being the solution tends to be an exam, right? Because it's easy to standardize, right? An exam is everybody gets the same exam, so it's standardized. Does that mean it caters for how much you learn from beginning to end, like from where you were to where you need to be? It might be better for optimizing what's the level you got to, but that could have been exactly the same level you started with. So again, what are you optimizing for? Certification, you're saying this person, I can certify that this person has a certain level of this. Well, then it's great. The exam is going to measure exactly that. If you do it well, of course, and it's well structured and all that, with all of the faults that exam has. I don't want to get deep into that discussion. I'm anti-exams in general, but even with all the disadvantages, the exam is going to be, is going to be a tool to measure that. Do you want to measure how they have progressed through your course, how much they have learned? Well, that has a fundamental problem. Unless you get people at exactly the same level or very similar levels, it's going to be really hard to measure that with an exam. Because you don't know where they're coming from. They could be even at a higher level. And especially when you're going into, for example, business education in MBAs, you tend to have people from all roads of life. And when you're teaching finance, you might have somebody who works in finance and might even, in one of the topics in finance, might even know more than the professor who's teaching. So in executive education, this happens in almost every session that you teach, no matter the subject. There is a very big potential for somebody in the room to know more about that topic than you do as a professor. So how do you cater for that massive divide that you have there? It's definitely not going to be, I certify. I mean, again, unless you're going for certification, I certify that everybody's at least at this level. Is that it? Fine. If you're catering for who's the best out of my class, then you start introducing the bell curve, right? And no matter what level they're in, I want to know who is performing the best compared to their peers. And that's going to show you a completely different picture as well. With exams, with oral presentations, it doesn't matter what you're measuring. When you introduce that element of competition, which is a game mechanic, a social game mechanic, you're introducing something different. You're measuring, you're optimizing for the competition there, not necessarily for learning more, which is one of the reasons I don't like too much the whole competitive bell curve approach.
I would like to hear, lastly, and this will be my last question, your thoughts on this idea of competition. So there's a huge competition coming up in March for us. We philosophically want to encourage all majors, not just STEM, engineering, and business accounting people, to come and participate in this large data event. We are intentionally giving recognition to teams who do well in one of the 5 categories. In other words, everyone's going to get acknowledged. There's a huge discussion about the problems of this model, which we've done now for 5 years. So I would like 2 questions. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you think about winner take all structures. And second idea is, could we satisfy everyone? I know that's impossible, but I'm also considering if you're coming to win, you get judged by a different group than if you're coming to play, sort of to say, and then you get judged by a different group. I don't know. We're not going to do that this year, but we're toying with the idea, and I would love to hear your point of view on that, if you don't mind.
One thing that we've seen, and of course, this always has nuances, right? When people say like, "Oh, our leaderboard's good," it's like, well, leaderboards can be great, and they can be terrible as well. If you think about a leaderboard where you have 100 people, right? Top 3 people are going to be competing and trying to win, and very close to getting to the end game and so on. Maybe the top 10 are still competing to be in the top 3. Usually, what tends to happen is that there starts to be a larger divide. So if you're, let's even just say bottom 50%. Do you think those people are going to be really interested in the results of the competition at that point? And especially if it starts taking really long and the divide just keeps getting greater. Eventually, you almost intentionally disengage people, right? And it's also, the competitive character. There's people who are very competitive. There's people who are not really competitive. But even in a competitive environment for salespeople, for example, you say, well, they're all very competitive and they enjoy competition. But they enjoy a competition, they have a real chance of winning. So you either make the competition very frequent, so that quote unquote everybody has a chance to win or has a chance to get something, or you're not generating something where eventually it's like, well, why would I even continue competing if I have no chance at being in the top 3, the top 10, whatever is interesting or relevant. And I'm saying 100 people, imagine 1,000 people, 10,000 people. When most people go in a marathon, as you were saying, most of the people are not even considering being in the top 100, right? They're saying, I want to finish. So I think in general, you want to think about competition from different lenses. One of the things I liked from what you said is that you're not having individuals necessarily just compete. You're having teams. So you're already introducing there an element of cooperation. So you're competing, but you're also collaborating with other people. So the competition becomes a little bit less cutthroat in general. In general terms, of course, it also depends on the setting and the kind of things that you do. So that tends to make people feel a little bit better. Although you want to give more opportunities for people to win. If you have 5 teams and every team and there's 5 rewards and nobody can get more than 1, you're saying it doesn't matter what you do, you still get a reward. And if the reward is what's meaningful and they're going into the competition, and the interesting thing is, how do I win? And there's nothing beyond who wins, then winner takes all is either I win or I lose, and everybody who loses is like disappointed. And that can be fine in the short-term dynamic as well. It's like everybody else like, well, there's a winner, everybody wanted to be a winner, end of story, that's it. If it's an ongoing thing, it becomes more and more complicated. But the other extreme is everybody wins. If everybody wins anyways, I don't have to make an effort. Why do I make an effort if I'm here for the reward? So what you want to make sure you do, independently of which is the dynamic here, is you want to make it meaningful for people to compete, to be there. It needs to be about more than just about the competition. Unless again I'm just right now watching. There's this Netflix, not Netflix, another of these streaming devices, Mr. Beast. Games, right? And everybody's competing for $5 million, and of course it's a huge reward, so it's very, very highly motivating. But of course, once you leave, once they kick you out of the competition, you're done. It doesn't matter if they're engaged anymore. They're off the competition because of the structure of the game, and because you're not really catering for the people in the game as much as you're catering for the audience. So you're making it interesting for the audience. It's a different mechanic. I'm saying this just to give you a perspective on there's many ways to view competition and to use it right. And there's also many ways to use it wrong and for it to be actually demoralizing or demotivating. It requires a lot of catering through specifically. And AI sometimes helps us in things like understanding which could be different levels of competition. Can I create different ways for them to compete? Like, it can help us in brainstorming. And then if 5 teams is probably something you could even do manually. But if you have a bunch of teams, what kinds of levels do I have to have a progression system? And then how do I do it? How do I structure it? It can help us, draw some of the curves and all of that as well. It can be very, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
I saw somebody was asking about the where you can find some of the case studies. If you go to octalysis.group.com, you'll find a button that says case studies. But I dropped the link on the chat as well. There's a lot to do there. If you want to find out more about the Octalysis framework, you literally just type online Octalysis framework or Yukai Chao. You'll find a lot on that topic. There's from very basic material. There's a free course that Yukai offers that's sent directly to your email, all the way to his Octalysis Prime Island, which is where most of the consultants that work here, we spent years being on that island for just learning in general. And then after you get to a certain level, you're able to even apply for a job there at the Octalysis group. But it's essentially a learning platform that is designed for learning about the Octalysis framework and behavioral design and science in general.
Great. Rob, Jim, do you guys have any follow-up question or want to share anything before we wrap up?
I was just going to say, if you are exploring gamification, definitely check out the Autolysis framework. Very comprehensive and well developed over, I don't know, 15 years, right, Rob? Something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, the framework started, and then Yukai wrote the book a few years later. It's a top Amazon bestseller, and all the good things that you can say about the book. It's also a very good introduction into the framework. You see a lot of that there. One of the beautiful things that I really enjoy about the Autolysis framework, and it's one of the reasons why I eventually joined this group. I've been in gamification for over a decade, well before joining the Autolysis group, is how there's so many levels of depth that you can get into it. You can have a quote unquote superficial understanding by reading a blog post, but then you can do the email course that I mentioned, and then you can read the book, which goes more in depth and provides more examples. I think Yukai is going to update it with examples from his own work in the past 15 years, and then you can go on a workshop or a masterclass with Yukai or somebody in the Autolysis group, and then you can do the Autolysis Prime for. There's so many levels, and the deeper you go, of course, the better you're able to see into these things, and you even have levels of certification, talking about certifying as well, where you say, well, am I a level 1 designer? You submit your work, you get a certificate for level 1, you can be level 2, and I think they recently opened level 3 because it's a group quest. So it's not about competing with other people, it's about there being enough people in level 2, and that then level 3 unlocks, and then when there's enough people in level 3, level 4 unlocks, and so on and so forth. This has been going for at least a decade that I know of.
Sure.
Talk about
Thank you.
long-term engagement.
So I think we are on time. As we wrap up, I want to zoom out for a moment and then just mention the points that have been noting during the session. Today's session reminded us that engagement is not about bigger buttons, more urgency, or optimizing for what's easiest to measure. It's about being intentional about what we are trying truly to optimize for. Like, are we optimizing for numbers? Are we optimizing for the competition, or for certification, or even for the capability? And what stood out for me in this is the idea that engagement is never neutral. Every design decision, whether it is scarcity message, competition structure, an exam, or even a dashboard metrics, reveals what we value most. And Rob, thank you so much for challenging us to think systematically, to step back before measuring, and to define our objectives clearly, and to look beyond activity towards meaningful growth. Thank you so much for leading this session for us. Yeah. We will be doing our next session on March 6th. That is on building 3 AI agents under an hour and saving 10 hours. So we will be shifting the perspective where we'll unlock the power of AI in a hands-on workshop. So do subscribe to our Luma calendar, and then don't forget to join us on to our next conversation with another session lead. Thank you so much. Until then, be curious and be creative. Thank you.